My name is Lauren. I'm 34 years old. I'm a CEO, an entrepreneur, and, according to Forbes, one of the top young female founders reshaping the American fashion industry. But to my father, I was just the one who'd end up like Jerry. Jerry, my dad's younger brother, the family embarrassment. The man who'd once played in a rock band, ran a comic book store that went bankrupt, and now lives in a modest apartment above a laundromat. They used to call him Useless Jerry behind his back, sometimes to his face. And according to my father, I was exactly like him. I wish I could tell you that I stood up for myself when he said that I looked him in the eye and told him he was wrong. But I didn't, because I was 16, because I didn't know any better, because, like every kid who's been trained to stay small and grateful, I just nodded and laughed along, even when I was dying inside. I still remember that day in slow motion. It was one of those sweaty, mosquito-thick July afternoons where the air feels sticky and nobody wants to do anything except sip lemonade and pretend to like each other. We were at my Aunt Sandy's house for the annual family barbecue, the kind where every uncle thinks he's a grill master and the women end up sweating in the kitchen, pretending they're not quietly competing over who brought the best side dish. I'd found a quiet spot in the corner of the patio, just me, my sketchbook, and a cold can of Sprite tucked between my thighs to keep cool. While the rest of the cousins played cornhole and tried to outdrink each other, I was busy sketching dress designs. They weren't perfect. Some were crooked, some weird. But to me, they were magic. Dresses that felt like they belonged to a different world, a better world. One where girls like me, quiet, artsy, awkward, could be seen, could be beautiful, could be powerful. That's when my dad found me. "What you working on, Lo?" he asked in that voice. That sharp, suspicious voice that made me instinctively slam the sketchbook shut like I'd been caught with a pack of cigarettes or porn. "Nothing," I said quickly. "Just doodling." But he wasn't stupid. He walked over, snatched the sketchbook out of my lap before I could move, and flipped through the pages with a disgusted look on his face. "Clothes?" he said, scoffing. "You drawing clothes?" I could feel my whole face turn red. "It's just for fun," I mumbled. He looked at me like I'd said I wanted to marry a tree. "For fun," he repeated. Then louder, much louder, he turned to the crowd behind us and bellowed, "Hey, Jerry! Your protégé's at it again!" Uncle Jerry, who'd been leaning against the porch railing sipping beer, blinked and looked over, confused, a little embarrassed. My dad held up the sketchbook like it was a dead squirrel. "She's drawing dresses," he laughed. "Better warn her what happened to your great ideas before she wastes her life chasing butterflies." There was laughter. Ugly, loud, hard laughter from the men. My brother Chad, golden boy, varsity quarterback, future investment banker, let out a high-pitched howl that made my stomach twist. Even my mother, even my mom, just gave me that tight, tired smile and muttered, "Maybe you should listen to your dad, honey. This isn't a real career. You're good with people. Why not HR? Or hospitality?" That was the moment something in me just shut down. I nodded. I smiled. I let the sketchbook be passed around like a joke. Someone even tried to light a cigarette with one of the pages. I didn't cry, but I wanted to. Not because I believed them, but because deep down, I was terrified they might be right. What if I was just like Jerry? What if I was destined to be a cautionary tale, the girl with potential who never made it? I kept that thought locked up tight for years. It became my internal alarm system. Anytime I got too confident, too ambitious, too bold, the voice would return. "Careful, Lauren. Don't go full Jerry." My relationship with Uncle Jerry was complicated. He was the black sheep, sure, but he was also the only person in the family who ever looked at me and saw me. When I was little, he taught me how to draw. We'd sit in the garage for hours with nothing but pencils, paper, and busted old art books he found at yard sales. He showed me how to shade fabric, how to draw movement. He was the first person who ever told me the phrase fashion illustration. But life hadn't been kind to him. He'd lost money, a lot of money. His marriage had failed. He didn't own property. He had no kids, no retirement plan, no health insurance. The family used him as a punchline. And yet, every time I saw him, he'd grin and say something like, "Still chasing the dream, kid?" Back then, I'd always say no, because by then, I'd already buried the dream so deep inside myself, I barely believed it existed. For the next 10 years, I lived exactly the way my parents wanted. I went to business school, got a safe marketing job, dated safe, boring men who wore Vineyard Vines polos and called my ambitions cute. I even got promoted twice. But every time I walked past a fabric store or saw a model in a magazine, something twisted in my stomach. It wasn't jealousy. It was grief, like mourning a version of myself that never got to live. I remember one night, at 26, sitting alone on my apartment floor, surrounded by empty takeout containers and rejected Tinder matches, when I pulled out my old sketchbook, the one I'd rescued from that barbecue all those years ago. The drawings were faded, the lines clumsy, but the fire was still there. Something inside me snapped, not in anger, in clarity. I remember whispering out loud, to no one in particular, "I think I want to try." And once the words were out, I couldn't take them back. That week, I enrolled in a night course in fashion design. I started sewing again. Badly at first. My machine jammed constantly, and my first dress looked like a paper bag with straps. But I kept going, secretly, quietly. No one knew. Not my coworkers, not my friends, definitely not my family. It was my secret rebellion, my quiet war, because I had a plan, not just to succeed, but to prove them all wrong. Years passed. I scraped together savings, worked weekends, took freelance gigs, launched an Etsy shop under a fake name, then a Shopify store, then pop-ups at local markets. One of my designs got featured in a local fashion blog, then a national one. Then a boutique in LA reached out, then an investor. And just like that, Lauren Cole Designs was born. At first, I kept it small, deliberate, no debt, no shortcuts, just me, my machine, and a dream that refused to die. But within 5 years, I had my own team, my own office, my own line at Nordstrom. And you know who was the first person I hired? Uncle Jerry. Not as a pity job. No. I hired him because he was brilliant, because he knew fabric better than anyone I'd ever met, because he was passionate, loyal, and exactly the kind of person I wanted by my side. When I handed him the offer letter, he cried, right there in the coffee shop. And then he said something I'll never forget. "You didn't end up like me, kid. You saved me." But the truth? I did end up like him, because he was never the joke. He was the blueprint, the only one who ever dared to dream out loud, even if he got crushed for it. And now he's thriving. Now he's my head of production. And my father has no idea. He still thinks I'm working in branding, still thinks Jerry somehow finally got lucky. But he's about to find out exactly how wrong he was. If I had to sum up my childhood in one image, it would be this: a dinner table, 4 chairs, my brother Chad in the spotlight, and me in the shadows. I was born 2 years after Chad, the golden boy, the prodigy, the legacy carrier. From the moment he could walk, it was like the universe handed him a crown and said, "You rule this family now." And everyone, from my father to my grandparents to the neighbor's cat, agreed. He was loud, charming, athletic. Teachers adored him. Coaches worshipped him. My dad practically built a shrine in our living room with every football trophy, debate medal, and framed report card he brought home. And me, I was sweet, polite, quiet. I colored inside the lines, got good grades, kept my head down. And that was the problem. I wasn't remarkable, not like Chad. And God help you if you weren't remarkable in my house. Our dad had this theory. He called it the Cole Standard. Basically, it meant that if you didn't perform, produce, or impress, you were wasting oxygen. He didn't say it like that, of course. He'd wrap it in motivational slogans like, winners get remembered, losers get forgotten. Or his favorite, don't be the nail that gets hammered, be the hammer. But the subtext was always clear. If you weren't crushing it, you were nothing. I remember once in 7th grade, I brought home a painting I'd done for art class. It was a still life, fruit in a bowl. I was proud of it. I'd stayed up until 2 a.m. getting the shadows right. I placed it carefully on the kitchen counter and waited for his reaction. He glanced at it for a half a second, then said, "Is this for extra credit or something?" I told him no. It was just for class. He nodded, tossed it in the recycling bin, and walked away. That moment split something in me. From then on, I learned not to show him anything that didn't come with a certificate, a ribbon, or a cash prize. And so I stopped showing him me. Chad, on the other hand, could breathe and get a standing ovation. When he won student council president in high school, we had a catered party with banners and a slideshow. When I got into the honors program for English Lit, I got a distracted thumbs up during halftime. Even at family events, it was always, "Chad, tell everyone about your internship at Merrill Lynch. Chad, show them your stock portfolio. Chad, why don't you give your sister some real career advice?" And Chad, he loved it. He wore that golden boy crown like it was welded to his skull. Smug, invincible, untouchable. Once, when I was 15, he found one of my sketchbooks in the basement. He held it up and said, "Is this yours? Thought it was something Jerry left behind. Same level of delusion." Then he laughed and tossed it into a pile of old newspapers. I didn't even flinch. I just picked it up, dusted it off, and waited until I was alone to cry. And then there was Mom. She wasn't cruel, just silent. A passive bystander in the house of ego. She had this way of brushing everything under the rug with a smile. "Don't take it personally, sweetie. You know how your father is." Or, "Your brother just wants the best for you, even if he doesn't say it the right way." She meant well, but her silence cut just as deep. Because when no one defends you, you start to wonder if, maybe, you don't deserve defending. The only person who ever made me feel seen was Uncle Jerry. Yeah, he was a mess. His apartment smelled like incense and ramen. He had weird hobbies and stranger friends. He never remembered to comb his hair, and his car had a broken radio that only played mariachi music. But when I was around him, I didn't feel like a disappointment. I felt alive. He'd ask about my drawings, encourage my ideas, treat me like someone whose dreams mattered. One summer, when I was 14, he took me to this tiny art exhibit downtown. It was in this converted warehouse, filled with wild, abstract fashion installations. Mannequins draped in metal and paper and silk, like aliens from another planet. I was mesmerized. I remember whispering to him, "People get paid to make this?" He looked at me with that crooked smile and said, "Hell yeah, they do. And if they don't, they should." I wanted to bottle that moment, save it for every time someone told me to be realistic. But of course, reality came crashing back the second my dad found out where we'd gone. What the hell kind of museum is that? You take her to see scrap fabric on sticks? Next time, take her to something useful, like a finance seminar. After that, Jerry wasn't allowed to babysit me alone anymore. They didn't say it out loud, but it was clear. Jerry was contamination, and they were afraid he might infect me. But they were too late. The infection had already taken root. It lived in my bones, in my fingertips, in the way I saw the world not just as it was, but as it could be. I started sketching in secret, at night, in class, on the backs of napkins and receipts. I devoured fashion blogs, YouTube tutorials, and Vogue issues like scripture. I studied garment construction like it was algebra, memorized fabric types the way other girls memorized song lyrics. And even though I never showed anyone, I was building something. A skill, a voice, a future, quietly, patiently, like a seed pushing through the cracks in concrete, because I knew one day I'd get out. I just didn't know how yet. By the time I turned 18, my life had already been planned out, down to the type of apartment I should rent, the major I was encouraged to choose, and the kind of man I should eventually marry. And none of it had anything to do with me. I was accepted into a liberal arts college in New York with a full scholarship for design. But my father took one look at the acceptance letter and said, "New York's full of pickpockets and junkies. You're not going to some overpriced art school to become a starving hipster." He poured himself a scotch and handed me a brochure for the University of Wisconsin's business program. "You'll major in marketing. It's creative enough to keep you from whining and safe enough for you to pay rent someday." My mother chimed in with a soft, "It's a really good school, sweetie, and it's only 3 hours from home." I remember sitting at that kitchen table, my dream crumpled in my lap, wondering when exactly my voice had stopped mattering in this family. I wanted to fight. God, I did. But I didn't have the words, or the courage, or the armor. So I nodded, smiled, said, "Okay." And just like that, the real me, the artist, the creator, the girl who saw colors where others saw numbers, was buried a little deeper. College was a blur of beige classes, beige roommates, beige expectations. I went to lectures about market trends and corporate structure while secretly sketching dress silhouettes on the back of my economics notes. My professors thought I was a little too quiet. My classmates called me corporate cute, which was their way of saying I looked like I belonged in an HR pamphlet. Meanwhile, Chad was thriving. He was now at an Ivy League school, majoring in finance and posting about it on LinkedIn like he was running for Congress. Every family call ended with my dad boasting about Chad's offer from Goldman or Chad's new mentor at Morgan Stanley. And then, with a reluctant pause, "And Lauren's doing good too, marketing classes, still finding her way." Finding my way, as if I were a child lost in a grocery store, not a woman being shoved into a life she didn't choose. But what no one knew was that underneath all the beige, I was planning. At night when my roommate snored, I'd sit by the window with a small sketchbook and a desk lamp, drawing until my fingers cramped. I taught myself how to use Illustrator from bootleg YouTube channels. I learned how to sew from online forums and trial and error, and burning my fingertips on curling irons I repurposed for pleats. I followed small Black and Latina designers on Twitter, DM'd them with questions, got ignored, tried again. I ordered cheap fabric in bulk from a warehouse in Jersey and practiced until I could hem a skirt blindfolded. Nobody saw me, but that was the point, because when you're invisible, you're free. I got my degree, with honors. My parents were so proud, they threw me a graduation party in the backyard, complete with plastic champagne flutes and a slideshow of Chad's LinkedIn updates that somehow made it into my celebration. Jerry wasn't there. I asked why. Mom said he was too busy. But I found out later he hadn't even been invited. He sent me a text that night. "They may not see you, but I do. And I'm proud as hell of you, kid." I cried in the bathroom. for a long time, because I didn't know how much I needed that sentence until I read it. I got a real job right after graduation, associate marketing coordinator at a software company downtown. It paid decently, came with benefits. My parents were thrilled. My dad even called it a big girl job. I smiled and nodded and thanked him, even as something inside me screamed. Every day, I wore a blazer that felt like a costume. Every morning, I walked into a glass building full of buzzwords and hollow compliments and thought, is this it? Is this the box I'm supposed to die in? But I didn't quit, because quitting would have meant they were right. Instead, I did something else, something that, to this day, I consider the bravest decision I've ever made. I started lying. I told my coworkers I had late-night Zoom meetings with a West Coast client. I told my parents I was taking online certification courses in digital branding. I told my boss I was interested in textile trends purely for market research. But in reality, I was designing. I was building a brand. At night, I worked in my cramped one-bedroom apartment, hunched over a borrowed sewing machine. I watched sunrise after sunrise through that foggy kitchen window, knowing I was doing something sacred. The kind of work that makes your soul buzz. The kind you do not for money or praise, but because you'd stop breathing if you didn't. I launched a tiny online store with 3 handmade pieces. No one bought anything for weeks. Then a girl from Portland messaged me. I love this skirt. It reminds me of who I was before I had to be so damn professional. I cried when I saw the order notification, because that was me. That was me. That was the moment I realized I wasn't crazy. I wasn't wasting my time. I was clawing my way back to the version of myself I'd buried years ago. The Lauren who dared to dream. The Lauren who sketched dresses while her family rolled their eyes. The Lauren who Uncle Jerry called dangerously imaginative. And now, that imagination was growing teeth. The first time I made a sale to someone I didn't know, someone who didn't share my last name or guilt-tripped me over a holiday, it felt like electricity in my veins. That girl from Portland. I still remember her name, Danny. She bought the skirt I'd named Unquiet Bloom. It was a deep wine-red A-line with asymmetrical pleats and a gold-stitched hem, the kind of skirt I used to imagine myself wearing to a life I didn't think I'd ever have. She messaged me 2 days after it arrived. I wore this to a poetry reading, and I swear I felt like a damn goddess. Thank you. I stared at that message for an hour, not because it shocked me, but because I believed her. I knew that feeling. The way a single piece of clothing could stitch you back together when the world had unraveled you. That night, I opened a new folder on my laptop called Proof. Inside it, I saved screenshots of every review, every thank you message, every photo a customer tagged me in, because I knew there would come a time, many in fact, when I'd want to quit, and I needed to remember why I started. My bedroom slowly turned into a war zone of fabric bolts, pins, thread spools, and scribbled measurements on walls. My clothes lived in a laundry basket I never unpacked. My meals were protein bars and coffee reheated 3 times. I wasn't building a business. I was building a rebellion. Every late night felt like a whisper to my younger self. They were wrong about you. Keep going. And I did. Even when I made no profit, even when a customer demanded a refund because the zipper broke after she forced herself into the wrong size, even when my parents visited and commented on how small my apartment was and how tired I looked. "Marketing jobs are draining, huh?" my mom said as she wiped her hands on a dish towel. I just smiled and nodded, because how could I explain to them that this exhaustion, this bone-deep ache in my back and wrists, was the first time I'd ever felt alive. Then came the night the pipes burst. Mid-January. Freezing rain. I'd left a batch of fabric to soak overnight in the tub, only to wake up to water dripping through the ceiling light. The landlord blamed me, told me I'd violated my lease by using the apartment as a factory. I lost 2 weeks of inventory. 3 orders were ruined. One customer left a nasty review that dropped my store rating. And just like that, the dream felt fragile again. I sat on my floor in pajamas, surrounded by wet satin and the smell of mildew, wondering if maybe my dad was right. Maybe I was chasing butterflies. I was about to take the store offline when I got an email. Subject line, small brand, big potential. It was from a woman named Layla, fashion editor at an indie-style blog. She'd seen my work on Instagram and wanted to feature me in their next New Voices segment. I reread the email 3 times, convinced it was spam. It wasn't. 3 weeks later, a photo of my unquiet bloom skirt was front and center on their homepage, under the headline, "The Quiet Revolution: Why Lauren Cole Might Be the Next Big Name in Ethical Fashion." I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell anyone except Jerry. He called me crying. "Kid, this is it. This is how it starts." And he was right. Because after that article dropped, everything changed. Orders tripled, then quadrupled. I was sewing in shifts, skipping meals, losing sleep. But I didn't care. I got invited to my first pop-up, then another. I met stylists, boutique owners. One of them gave me the email of a silent investor who focused on female-led startups. I still remember walking into that pitch meeting in a blazer 2 sizes too big, clutching a binder of hand-drawn designs and production costs like a nervous high schooler with a book report. The investor, Ava Brooks, was tall, sharp-eyed, and terrifyingly elegant. She listened, didn't interrupt once. Then she said, without looking up, "How much are you asking for?" My throat nearly closed up. I'd practiced saying 10K, maybe 15K if I was feeling bold, but instead I heard myself whisper, 50,000 for equipment, a dedicated studio space, and part-time help. She stared at me, and then smiled. That's more like it. Ava became more than an investor. She became my first real ally. She didn't coddle me, she didn't baby me, but she believed in me with a fierceness I'd never known outside of Jerry. She called me out when I played small, reminded me I was running a brand, not a lemonade stand. She helped me set up LLC paperwork, connect with pattern makers, and streamline production. She introduced me to a former Burberry consultant who agreed to help with operations, on the condition that he remain anonymous. That consultant was Jerry. Yeah. Turns out the useless uncle had spent his 20s in Europe working with vintage textile houses and had way more technical knowledge than anyone in the family gave him credit for. Ava met him once, offered him a role instantly. He nearly fainted. "You serious?" he asked. "I don't offer jobs as jokes," she replied. That day, I gave Jerry his first business card in over 20 years. It read, "Jerry Cole, Head of Product Integrity." He held it like it was a newborn. The business kept growing, and so did I. But I still hadn't told my family. They thought I was still doing marketing, still working my way up the corporate ladder, still just fine. I didn't correct them, not yet, because I was waiting for the right moment for impact. And that moment was coming soon. It's funny how quickly people start treating you differently when they think you're successful. Even if they don't know you're successful, even if they just suspect it. At one point, I started noticing the subtle shift in my mom's tone when I talked about work. She used to nod vaguely, half listening while she folded laundry or scrolled through her phone, but lately she'd say things like, "So, this company you work for, they let you travel now?" Or, "Your cousin Mindy said she saw someone wearing a skirt that looked a lot like the one you wore at your graduation. Is that a thing now?" I kept it vague, non-committal, because I wasn't ready. Not yet. They still thought of me as the girl with a quiet desk job and a tiny apartment with a leaky bathroom. I didn't tell them that I had already outgrown 2 workspaces in under a year, that I'd signed a lease on a sunlit studio loft downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and 3 industrial sewing stations imported from Italy, that Jerry, the man they once called deadweight, now managed a team of 6 and spoke at trade panels about fabric ethics, that Ava, the investor they didn't even know existed, had already floated the idea of scaling. I didn't tell them I had interns, or clients in 3 countries, or custom orders being requested by a Netflix costume department, because part of me, the scarred, silent part, still wanted to protect this dream, to hold it close, like a fire I was terrified they'd blow out if I let them breathe near it. Then came the invitation, an upscale fashion conference in Chicago, invite only, with a panel titled Disruptors in Sustainable Design. I was listed right below the founder of a multi-million-dollar activewear company, and the keynote speaker, Ava. She called me 2 days before the event and said, "Pack something killer, you're going to be seen." So I did. I wore a deep navy jumpsuit I'd designed for myself, cinched at the waist, structured at the shoulders, with gold piping so subtle you didn't notice it until you had to. My name card read, Lauren Cole, founder and creative director, Cole Studios. That night, at the rooftop mixer, someone tapped me on the shoulder. I turned around and froze. It was Mindy. My cousin Mindy, the one who married into a family of realtors, drove a white Lexus, and once told me at Thanksgiving that art degrees are just a slower route to waitressing. She stared at my name badge, then at me. "Wait, this is you? Cole Studios?" I nodded, smiling gently. "Yep, it's me." She blinked like I'd just told her I moonlighted as Beyoncé's stylist. "Wow. I mean, I've seen your stuff. On Instagram. I didn't know. You were like, real." That sentence stuck with me the whole flight home. I was real now. Not because I'd changed, but because the world had finally caught up. 2 weeks later, I got a message from a friend of a friend. Her name was Jasmine, an event planner who handled high-end corporate retreats. "Hey Lauren, weird question," she wrote. "We've got a client who's organizing a family reunion at Lakeshore Estate in July. One of the guests asked if we could get someone from Cole Studios to speak briefly on entrepreneurship and women-led brands. You interested?" I stared at the message for a solid minute. Lakeshore Estate. That's where my family was having our reunion. I'd ignored the group text invite from my aunt weeks ago. Something about matching shirts and lawn games and celebrating family legacy. I hadn't planned to go. But this was different. This was fate. I messaged Jasmine back. I'd be honored. And just like that, the board was set. The day of the reunion, I showed up late. Not by accident, by design. I knew the schedule, knew when the introductions would start, knew when my dad would be standing at the mic, puffing his chest out about Chad's latest promotion and bragging about the Cole family values. I walked in just as they were finishing lunch. The room was bright, walls of glass overlooking the lake. Everyone in matching blue t-shirts with Cole Crew 2025 printed across the chest in Comic Sans. I wore all black. Tailored black pants, black silk blouse, gold earrings, no name tag, heads turned, mouths paused mid-bite, and then, one by one, they recognized me. Lauren, the quiet one, the marketing girl, the daughter who'd never quite found her stride. I hugged my mother, kissed my aunt on the cheek, smiled at Chad like we hadn't spent years playing emotional Hunger Games. And then I walked over to Jerry. He looked up from his plate and smirked. "Is it time?" I grinned. It's time. Because what no one else knew was that in 20 minutes, I'd be the one holding the mic. And everything they thought they knew about me, Every assumption, every underestimation, every snide comment was about to burn. I could feel my pulse in my ears. The sound of glassware clinking, laughter echoing, and silverware scraping against ceramic plates faded into a low hum, like my brain was tuning out every frequency that wasn't directly tied to what I was about to do. It had been 15 years. 15 years since that barbecue, since my father held up my sketchbook like it was a joke and compared me to the one man in the family they treated like garbage. 15 years since they laughed at the idea that I could create anything worth admiring. And now, here I was, standing in the same room as them, but no longer invisible, no longer apologizing for being me. Jerry stood beside me, his tie slightly crooked, glasses fogged at the corners. He was nervously smoothing his shirt, the one I'd custom designed for him last year, with subtle embroidery in the seams that read, "Still Dreaming." He leaned in. "They have no idea what's coming, huh?" I shook my head, smiling. "Nope, not a clue." And honestly, that made it sweeter. Across the room, my father stood at the center of a makeshift stage, really just a step-up platform near the dessert table, one arm around Chad, the other gripping a microphone. "This family," he said proudly, "has always been built on excellence. From my father, who built a small plumbing business into a thriving service company, to my son Chad, who was just promoted to senior portfolio analyst at one of the most prestigious hedge funds in New York, we are a family of builders, doers, winners." The crowd clapped politely, some more enthusiastically than others. He went on, "Now I know not everyone takes the same path. Some of us find our success later. Some of us are still searching." His eyes scanned the room, landed on me, held just long enough to sting. I kept smiling. He cleared his throat, shifting focus. "But we also believe in uplifting each other, so today we're excited to welcome a special guest, someone who's making waves in the business world, someone the event team brought in after hearing about our family's legacy. She's here to talk about entrepreneurship and building brands from the ground up." My mom looked confused. My aunt leaned toward her. "Did you know we were getting a speaker?" She shook her head, and then Jasmine, the event coordinator, took the mic and said 4 words that changed everything. "Please welcome Lauren Cole." Silence. Like the sound got sucked out of the entire building. My father blinked. My mother's fork slipped from her hand. "And Chad?" Chad let out a short, confused laugh, like he thought it was a prank. But it wasn't. I stepped up, shoulders back, chin high, heart steady, and I said into the mic, slowly, clearly, "Hi, I'm Lauren Cole, founder and creative director of Cole Studios, a sustainable fashion label with a global client base, a downtown flagship studio, and a staff of 15. We've been featured in Vogue, Refinery 29, and The Cut. And today, I'm here to talk about what happens when the world tells you to shrink, and you decide to grow anyway." The room exploded in whispers. I didn't flinch, didn't stutter, because I had waited my whole life for this moment. I went on to tell my story, edited for professionalism, but raw in its truth. I talked about building a brand from nothing, about risking security for purpose, about failure, doubt, and starting over more times than I could count. I spoke about my first designs, about late nights alone, about believing in something long before anyone else did. And then I looked directly at my father. They said I was like my Uncle Jerry, that I'd end up broke, lost, or forgotten. But what they didn't understand is that Jerry was never the problem. He was the blueprint. He dared to dream before it was safe. And now, he's my head of production, my most trusted advisor, and the best hire I've ever made. Jerry's eyes welled. Aunt Sandy gasped. Someone dropped a glass, and still, I didn't blink. So the next time someone tells a kid to be realistic, maybe ask yourself if what they really mean is be afraid. I wasn't born to be afraid. I was born to build. And with that, I handed the mic back to Jasmine. The applause started slow. Then it swelled. Not from everyone, but from enough. I walked off that platform with my spine straight and my heels clicking like a war drum. And my father? He looked like a man who'd just realized he built a cage for a daughter who grew wings. The clapping ended, but the silence that followed? That silence screamed louder than any applause ever could. I stepped off the stage slowly, heels sharp against the polished tile, every click echoing like a gavel. 1, 2, 3. Every step said, "You were wrong about me." My father didn't move, didn't blink. He just stood there, clutching the microphone like it might suddenly tell a different story. Like maybe the words I'd just spoken weren't real. Like he could rewind time and stop me from ever opening my mouth. Too late. I met his eyes as I walked past. He tried to hold my gaze. He really did. But the thing about power, when you've been sitting on the throne too long, you forget what it's like to kneel. And in that moment, he realized he wasn't king anymore. My mother was the first to react. She stood abruptly, brushing invisible crumbs off her lap. "Lauren, why didn't you ever tell us?" Her voice wasn't angry. It was small, thin, almost frightened. I turned to her, calm. "You never asked." She flinched like I'd slapped her. And maybe, in a way, I had. Because she'd spent years pretending I was content with the box they shoved me into, pretending the quiet daughter was fine just because she wasn't loud like Chad. But silence isn't peace. Silence is pressure. It's rage with good posture. She looked down at her hands and whispered something I didn't catch. Behind her, Aunt Sandy dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. "I had no idea you were that successful," she said, like successful was a diagnosis. Jerry walked over and placed a steady hand on my shoulder. His eyes were glassy, but his grip was strong. "You did it, kid." I smiled. "We did." He nodded. And suddenly, people started gathering. Cousins who hadn't looked my way in years. Uncles who used to ruffle my hair and call me sweet girl. All of them wearing polite smiles now, hungry for a piece of the new version of me. Mindy showed up first. "You were amazing up there, Laure. Honestly, I'm kind of blown away." I raised an eyebrow. "Last time we talked, you said fashion was for bored housewives." She flushed. "I didn't mean it like, it's fine." But I didn't hug her, didn't make it easy. Because the girl they used to ignore, she wasn't here anymore, and the woman in her place didn't owe anyone comfort. Chad approached next. Of course he did, all swagger and faux humility, hands in his pockets, like we were old pals meeting at a bar. "So, damn. I guess I underestimated you." I said nothing. Let him stew in that awkward silence. He scratched the back of his neck. "I mean, Mom and Dad thought you were just like playing around online. I didn't know this was a thing. It's always been a thing," I said. "You just never bothered to look." He tried to laugh it off. Okay, fair. Look, all I'm saying is, what you've done is legit. For real. Respect." It felt like a compliment, but it tasted like crumbs. Then finally he came. My father. Still holding the mic, though the speaker had long since been cut off. He stood there in front of me, jaw tight, pride bleeding out of every corner of his expression. He didn't say, "I'm proud of you." He didn't say, "I'm sorry." Instead, he said, "You've built something impressive. No denying that. But you could have told us. We could have helped, supported you." That made me laugh, cold, sharp, tired. "Supported me?" You told me I'd end up like Jerry." He blinked. "That was years ago. But it echoed every day since." He looked around, realizing others were listening. His voice dropped lower. "Look, I didn't mean to belittle you. I just wanted you to succeed. And in my world, this kind of artistic stuff, it's risky. I didn't want you getting hurt." "So you chose to hurt me first?" That shut him up. For the first time in my life, I watched my father speechless. The man who had words for every situation, opinions about everything, reduced to blinking, his mouth slightly open, trying to rearrange the facts of my life into a version where he was still in control. But there was no rearranging this, because the truth was now a spotlight, and he couldn't hide in the dark anymore. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. People smiled differently. Some pitied him. Some admired me. Most just tried to figure out what they'd missed. But I wasn't there to explain myself. I'd already said what needed to be said. I left before dessert. And this time, when I walked out, I didn't look back. The thing about power is, it doesn't disappear quietly. It fights. It claws. It gasps like a dying animal, still convinced it can rule the room with one final roar. And that's exactly what my father tried to do after I left the reunion. He couldn't let the truth settle, couldn't allow my version of the story, the real version, to be the one people took home. So he did what he always did when he felt outmatched. He lied. I found out the next day from Jerry. He called me as I was sipping coffee at my studio, exhaustion still humming behind my eyes from the emotional roller coaster of the day before. "Hey kid, just a heads up." That tone, that sigh, I already knew something was coming. "Your dad's doing damage control." I closed my eyes. Of course he was. Jerry continued. "He's telling people you exaggerated, that you inflated numbers and name-dropped to feel important. Said you're playing fashion CEO with investor money like it's a lemonade stand." I exhaled slowly. Did anyone believe him? A few did, the ones who still think he walks on water. But most of them, they saw you yesterday. They saw us. They're not stupid. Not stupid, maybe, but still so easily swayed by the loudest voice in the room. And for decades, that voice belonged to my father. He'd built a brand in his own way, not of fashion, but of fear, control, dominance. And now that brand was crumbling. Later that week, my mom called. Her voice was too cheerful, too bright, the kind of tone she used when she was desperately trying to pretend nothing was wrong. "Hi, honey. Just wanted to say again how wonderful your little talk was. I think your cousin Darlene was really inspired. She even mentioned starting her own Etsy shop." "Mom," I said gently, "we don't have to pretend." There was a pause, and then a small sigh. "He's hurt, you know, your father. He says you humiliated him." I closed my eyes again, counted to 5. "He humiliated me for years, Mom. In front of you, in front of everyone. Did you ever call him to tell him how I felt?" Silence. Not even breathing. Just that vast, empty kind of quiet that makes you realize how long the imbalance has lasted. "I didn't know how," she whispered finally. "You didn't want to." That's when I stopped explaining, stopped defending. Because you can't make someone see the cage when they've convinced themselves it's a castle. The fallout rippled. I started receiving awkward messages from family members I hadn't heard from in years. "Hey, Lauren, so proud of you. Would love to grab coffee sometime and pick your brain on how to launch a personal brand." "Hi, cousin. Just wondering, do you do private fittings for family? Asking for my daughter's homecoming dress?" "Hey, I've got this friend who wants to invest in ethical fashion. Can I connect you?" Suddenly, I was valuable, desirable, useful. But they were too late. They didn't get me. They got the press release, the brand name, the polish and prestige they once said would never come. Then there was Chad, always so sure the world bent for him. He sent a message that started with "Yo sis" and ended with, "We should do something together. Maybe merge our brands? I could handle finance. You do the creative stuff. We'd be unstoppable." I didn't reply, because the girl he used to laugh at was now someone he wanted to leverage, and I didn't owe him a piece of what he never helped build. But the real reckoning came 2 weeks later at my studio. I was reviewing new fabric samples with Jerry when Ava, my investor, walked in with a smirk. "You're not going to believe who emailed me." She slid her phone across the table. Subject line, "Investment Inquiry, Cole Studios." The sender? Richard Cole, my father. I read the message. It was short, formal, like a man trying to wear clothes he didn't own. "I've followed your work with Lauren Cole and her company. While I had no idea she was building something of this scale, I'm impressed. I'd love to discuss potential funding opportunities or strategic partnerships moving forward, perhaps a family collaboration." I blinked, then laughed, a sound that started in my throat and shook my chest. He wanted in, after years of dismissing me, mocking me, crushing me. Now he wanted to collaborate. I looked at Ava. She raised an eyebrow. "Your call." And just like that, I realized something powerful. I held the mic now, not just on a stage, but always, in meetings, in negotiations, in my life. So I wrote back, short, polite, firm. "Dear Richard, thank you for your interest. At this time, Cole Studios is not seeking external funding from legacy contacts. Should our policies change, we'll be in touch. Best, Lauren Cole." I hit send, felt nothing but clean electric silence afterward. It was over. Not the story, not the business, but the need to be seen by a man who only knew how to measure worth in mirrors of himself. You would think that was the end of it. That a firm rejection from me, clear, cold, professional, would be enough for my father to get the message. To finally understand that the girl he used to shame and belittle no longer needed or wanted anything from him. But narcissism doesn't go quietly. It needs an audience. And my father? He was losing his. So he doubled down. 3 days after I sent that email, I got a call from my Aunt Sandy. The kind of call where the ringtone alone made your skin crawl. "Lauren, sweetie, I don't know what's going on, but your father's making phone calls. Lots of them." What kind of calls? To vendors? Designers? He even called some small boutiques saying he was a family partner at Cole Studios and needed access to internal sourcing data. Someone from a textile agency called me by mistake, asking for verification. He's trying to insert himself. I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't just desperate. It was sabotage. I thanked her, hung up, and immediately contacted Ava. She didn't even sound surprised. "I figured he might pull something like this. I've already locked down our vendor list, changed passcodes, legal's on standby." I nodded, rubbing my temples. "Why is he doing this? He hates what I do." "He doesn't hate what you do," Ava said. "He hates that you did it without him." And that was the truth that finally crystallized in my chest. It had never been about fashion, or dreams, or being realistic. It was about control. And now that I had mine back, he couldn't breathe without finding some way to take it from me again. I tried ignoring it, tried taking the high road, but the calls didn't stop. Neither did the quiet manipulation. A cousin texted me saying my dad claimed the company was a family venture and that I'd always planned to eventually bring him in. Another aunt told me my father felt betrayed, that he always supported my creativity, and that I'd twisted the past to make him the villain. I didn't respond. Not out of guilt, but because I refused to play the game anymore. Then the phone call came. Private number, late at night. I almost didn't answer, but something in my gut said, "This is the moment." I picked up. "Lauren," his voice, flat, controlled, still pretending to be calm, even now. "I see you've been busy." "Always am," I replied. Pause. "You embarrassed me at that event, made me look like a fool in front of our family." I told the truth. "You made me the villain." "I didn't have to. You did that yourself." Another pause. "You think you're powerful now because you got lucky, because you tricked some investors and made some dresses." I let that hang in the air. Let the insult echo back to him. "You're still that same little girl scribbling in a notebook. I gave you structure, a name. Everything you are is because of me." And that was it. That was the final thread, the last desperate gasp of a man who'd lost the script. "No, Dad. Everything I am is in spite of you." Silence. "You tried to beat the magic out of me, tried to flatten me into a version of yourself that would make you feel big, but I'm not your mirror anymore," he scoffed. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said. "I'm being free." And then I hung up. No yelling, no breakdown, no begging for him to see me, just a clean line, severed. I sat there in my apartment, the city humming quietly outside, and felt a calm I hadn't felt in years, because it wasn't just about proving him wrong anymore. It was about reclaiming me, the girl who used to flinch every time someone raised their voice, the girl who tore up sketches just to avoid another lecture, the woman who stayed silent, professional, agreeable, just to be tolerated. She was gone, buried, and in her place stood someone powerful, self-made, unbent. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was sovereign. The next morning I walked into my studio and found Jerry already there, coffee in one hand, measuring tape in the other. "Heard about the vendor calls," he said. "Yeah, it's handled." He looked at me, really looked. "You good?" I nodded. "I think I'm better than good." He smiled. "You look like your mother did when she left your grandpa's house for the last time. Quiet, resolved, dangerous." I laughed. "I'm not dangerous." "Oh, kid," he said, grinning. "You've always been dangerous. They just didn't know it yet." Later that day, Ava pulled me aside. "You handled this like a CEO. I've seen Fortune 500 founders crack under less." "He's just a man," I said. "He stopped being a monster the day I stopped being afraid." She tilted her head. "Are you ready for the next step?" I blinked. "Next step?" She handed me a folder. Inside were documents, expansion proposals, studio renovations, European partnerships, and at the bottom, a title transfer form. "You've earned full control," she said. "No more board, no more investors. You own it all now." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just the peak. This was mine. Not rented, not borrowed, but built, thread by thread. It's strange how power lingers even after it's gone, like smoke after a fire. You can't see it, but you smell it everywhere. You feel it in the walls. You flinch when the floor creaks, even though there's no danger anymore. That's how it felt in the weeks after I cut my father off. Technically, it was done. He no longer had access to anything. No control, no leverage, no voice in my story. But his shadow still curled around the corners of my mind like smoke under a locked door. Until the final confrontation came. It was a charity gala. Irony of ironies. A fundraiser for young girls pursuing creative arts careers, hosted at a historic mansion-turned museum downtown. Ava had sponsored it. I was the keynote speaker. Jerry was seated next to me, dapper in a tailored navy blazer I'd designed just for him. A quiet nod to the fabric shop he used to run, with pinstripes made from digitally printed scans of vintage receipts. As I mingled, I noticed a familiar shape in the crowd: stiff shoulders, perfectly pressed gray suit, a face like a clenched jaw with eyes. My father. He hadn't been invited. He hadn't needed to be. Not when he knew how to buy a donor ticket and insert himself into any room that looked important. Our eyes met. He didn't smile, didn't wave, he just watched. I turned back to my table, let him look. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't mention him, didn't allude to him, but I didn't have to. I spoke about girls being told they're too emotional to lead, about daughters being asked to dim themselves so sons can shine brighter, about how realism is often just another word for fear someone else taught you to carry. I saw him stiffen in his chair, saw his fists tighten. But he didn't move. When I finished, the room stood. Everyone clapped, even Jerry. But not him. He sat there, alone, powerless. And I realized something I hadn't known I needed until that very moment. I didn't hate him anymore. I didn't need his apology, didn't need his love, didn't need anything. Because the girl who once begged for his approval, she had become the woman he now had to buy tickets just to see. After the gala, he approached me, cornered me near the exhibit of classic film costumes. I saw the hesitation in his step, the defeat in his posture. "Lauren." I turned. "Richard." He winced. First time I'd ever called him that. That was a hell of a speech. "Thank you." He looked around. "This place is impressive. You always wanted this world." "No, I wanted my world. You just never saw it." He nodded slowly. "I thought I was protecting you. From disappointment. From failure. You were protecting yourself. From the idea that I didn't need you." His face tightened. "Do you really believe I never supported you?" "I believe you supported the version of me that made you feel powerful, not the one that made me feel alive." He swallowed. "So this is it then? You've erased me?" I shook my head. "I didn't erase you. I just stopped writing you into every chapter." He didn't speak, couldn't. So I said the final words, not to punish, not to crush, but to end it clean. "You told me once I'd end up like Jerry." "You were right. I just don't think you realized. That's the best thing I could have become." Then I walked away. And for the first time in my life, he didn't follow. The next morning, I woke up to the sunlight pouring through the studio loft windows. I made coffee, opened my inbox. An email sat at the top. Subject: donation confirmation, in honor of Lauren Cole. Amount: $25,000. Designated to Young Women in Design Full Ride Scholarship. No name, no message, just a payment. But I knew who it was from. And in that small gesture, silent, unseen, I finally saw a version of him I could live with. Not the man he was, but maybe the one he could have been if he hadn't been so scared. That evening, I hosted a team dinner. Our entire staff, designers, interns, pattern makers, the shipping coordinator who once single-handedly saved a Christmas rush disaster. And Jerry, of course, in the middle, telling a story with his hands and making everyone laugh too hard to eat. We toasted to growth, to grit, to the girls who were told no, but did it anyway. And for the first time in years, I felt free, not just from him, but from the lie that said I had to earn love through silence. There's a strange quiet that settles after a storm. Not the peace they talk about in poems. No, this quiet feels like aftershock, like walking through a home with no roof, where all the walls are gone and everyone inside is pretending the wind isn't howling through the hallways. That's what the family felt like after the gala. Something had shifted, not just in me, in them. The story had changed. I wasn't the quiet one anymore. I wasn't the nice girl in marketing or Jerry's weird little shadow. I had become something they didn't have a script for, and without a script, they fell silent. The group chats went quiet. The family Facebook thread, once filled with stock photos of casserole dishes and birthday banners for Chad, slowed to a crawl. Even my mom, who used to send daily links to apartment listings just in case I ever wanted to move back closer to home, stopped texting for nearly a week. It was eerie, and in a way, refreshing. Because when a family lives on hierarchy, on who gets praised and who gets pitied, silence is sometimes the only way they know how to process an overthrow, and that's exactly what had happened. Their golden system, the one where Chad was the star, I was the ghost, and my father was the director, burned from the inside. I got the first real message from my mom one evening. Simple, no emojis. No. Your father hasn't been the same since the event. He's quiet, not angry, just lost. I stared at it for a long time. Lost. As if I'd stolen something from him. When in reality, he'd built his entire identity on the illusion that I'd never find mine. And now that I had, he didn't know who he was anymore. I typed a reply. He'll find his way, or he won't. Then hit send without rereading, because I was done caretaking his ego. A week later, Chad reached out. Video call. Bold move. I almost didn't pick up, but something in me, not kindness, not forgiveness, just curiosity, clicked, accept. He was sitting in his sleek Manhattan apartment, wearing a hoodie that probably cost more than the first 10 dresses I ever sold combined. Hey. Pause. So, look, I just want to say, you really blew me away, Lauren. Like, I was seriously shocked. I nodded, letting him keep talking. And I've been thinking, you and me, we're both doing big things, you know? Maybe it's time we stop pretending we're not in the same league. I tilted my head. What do you want, Chad? He blinked, then grinned sheepishly. Okay, straight up. There's a fund I'm starting. Women-led startups. Real money. Real exposure. You'd be a killer ambassador. You want me to lend you my name? No. I want you to join. Co-own it. Make it real. We're family. Imagine the story. Siblings who conquered from two worlds. The press would eat it up. I let the silence stretch, then said, You didn't care about my world until the rest of the world did. His grin faltered. That's not fair. No, it's true. He sighed. So that's it? You're just done with all of us? No, I'm done begging for respect that should have been given freely. Click. I ended the call, felt nothing but breath in my lungs. I visited Jerry the next day. He was in his element, surrounded by fabric swatches, 2 cups of cold coffee, and a stack of designs from the intern team. So, how's the old kingdom? Cracked, I said, but still pretending it's a palace. He laughed. Sounds about right. They're not fighting anymore, I added. They're just quiet. That's worse. I know. He leaned back, nodding slowly. That's how they rebuild it, kid. Not with fire, with silence. Make you question yourself. Make you wonder if you were too harsh, if you imagined it all. I swallowed hard, because yes, that voice had crept in. Was I too cold? Too blunt? Was I rewriting the past out of anger? But no, I had receipts, scars, silences that lasted years. Jerry stood, walked to his old cabinet, and pulled out a small, worn sketchbook. Handed it to me. Inside, designs, mine. From when I was 16, he'd kept them, even after they'd been mocked, tossed, nearly burned by my cousins as a joke. "You want to know if you were too harsh?" he said. "Yeah. Read those. Then remember who told you they weren't worth keeping." I did, and I remembered. Every page was a bruise, and every stitch in my company now, a healing. The funny thing about surviving a storm is that the damage isn't always obvious. Some houses collapse, but others just lean, crooked foundations, quiet rot, and for a while they still stand, until one day something tiny breaks and everything caves. That's what my family became after the gala. Not fallen, just tilted, waiting for the next moment to pretend everything was normal again. And me? I was done pretending. It started with Thanksgiving. An email went out. Subject line: family dinner, same place, same time. No mention of what had happened. No mention of me, but I was CC'd, of course. CC'd of, because they still wanted me to feel included, as long as I played by the rules, as long as I smiled, nodded, brought pie, and didn't mention that I had once been treated like a punchline for drawing dresses at the dinner table. I didn't reply, didn't explain, didn't argue. I simply marked the date and made other plans. That Thursday, I hosted something different. In a sunlit garden courtyard behind my studio, we set out long tables draped in linen, scattered with hand-picked wildflowers and little ceramic name cards I'd made the night before. The guests? My people. Jerry, Ava, my interns, team leads, seamstresses, production manager, the new hire who had just come out to his family and hadn't been invited to their dinner, the pattern maker who'd moved to the city after fleeing a home that told her her art was a waste of time, the shipping clerk who once told me my designs were the reason she stopped hiding her body in oversized clothes, and next to me, my assistant Renee, who, after 2 years of quiet loyalty, late-night Starbucks runs, and beautifully chaotic spreadsheets, had become something closer to a little sister. We toasted with rosé and sparkling cider, laughed about the way Ava nearly fainted when a model wore one of our pieces on a surprise Vogue cover, sang along to Fleetwood Mac under string lights, and at one point, Renee raised her glass and said, "To Lauren, not just for giving us jobs, but for giving us a place to belong." There was silence, the good kind, the kind that wraps around you like a blanket you didn't know you needed. And for the first time in months, I cried. Not because I was broken, but because I was full. Later that night, as people slowly trickled out, Jerry stayed behind to help clean. He was scraping wax from a candle dish when he looked at me and said, "You know, this right here, this is the real reunion." I smiled. "Yeah, it is." He walked over, serious now. "You did what none of them ever had the courage to do. You stopped chasing their approval. It took me 34 years. It was still fast." We laughed, and when he hugged me that night, long and quiet, I felt something lift. A chapter closing. A weight set down, not erased, just released. December passed. New projects, holiday sales, a surprise celebrity shout-out that nearly crashed our website. The business grew. So did my peace. And then, 2 days before Christmas, I got a letter, an actual letter, from my father. No return address, no opening greeting, just a page, typed, signed in blue ink. "I don't know how to talk to you anymore. Maybe I never did. I spent so long trying to shape you into something familiar that I never stopped to realize you were already whole. You hurt me at the gala, but not because you lied, because you told the truth. And the truth is, I was cruel, not out of hate, out of fear. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope one day you might let me try again, not as your father, but as a man trying to become someone worthy of the daughter he never really saw. I read it twice, then folded it, slid it into a drawer, not to forget, but to remember. Because sometimes healing doesn't mean reuniting. Sometimes it just means letting the wound breathe without picking the scab. I didn't call him, didn't write back. But that spring, I quietly arranged for one of our scholarships, for a young girl from my hometown who'd applied to fashion school, to be awarded in his name. Not to honor him, but to repurpose the legacy, to turn the weight he once was into something that might help someone else float. Months later, at another family event I didn't attend, I heard through Sandy that he sat quietly the whole night, no grand speeches, no toasts, just watched. And when someone mentioned my name, he didn't flinch. He just said, "She built something I couldn't." That was enough, not for reconciliation, but for peace. I still get messages sometimes from cousins, distant relatives, even Chad, who, to his credit, stopped pitching collabs and started simply sending the occasional "congrats on the new drop." "Looked fire!" I answer when I want to, ignore when I need to, because the difference now is I choose. I choose who has access to me. I choose the family I build. And I choose how my story is written. Not by inheritance, not by bloodlines, not by shame, but by fire, by freedom, by the girl who was told she'd end up like useless Uncle Jerry, and became the woman who gave Jerry his dignity back, and herself something far greater, a life where no one dims her light again. The day I finally felt free wasn't some grand moment. There were no champagne corks popping, no spotlights, no perfect Instagram quote. It was just a regular Tuesday. I was sitting on the floor of my studio, barefoot, hair up in a knot, surrounded by muslin scraps and swatches for the new summer collection. Renee was in the corner, snacking on dried mango, typing furiously on her laptop. Jerry was arguing, playfully, with one of the interns about button placement. Ava was on speakerphone yelling about PR contracts, and I just paused, took a breath, looked around, and realized, this is it. This is the life I thought I'd never have. Not because it was glamorous, but because it was mine. No one handed it to me. No one designed it for me. No one filtered it through a lens of what's best for Lauren. I built this, thread by thread, reputation by reputation, refusal by refusal. And maybe the most powerful thing? I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for recognition, not for applause, not for an apology that may never come. After the gala, after the letter, after the holidays, I stopped keeping track of how often I heard from my family, because they no longer defined the seasons of my life. They became background noise, old songs I didn't need to replay to know the lyrics. But Jerry, Ava, Renee, my team, they became my constant. We worked, we celebrated, we failed sometimes, but we failed forward. One day, Jerry came into the studio holding a dusty photo album. "Look what I found in my closet," he said, smirking. Inside were old Polaroids of the tiny fabric shop he once owned, the one the family mocked relentlessly when it failed. Pictures of him standing proudly behind rolls of velvet and tweed, a hand-lettered sign that read, "Jerry's Textiles, for the Dreamers." I turned the page. There, in the back, a crayon drawing. Mine, from when I was 8. a crooked dress sketch on lined paper. Dessin by Lauren, scribbled in purple marker. "You kept this?" I asked. "Of course," he said. It was the first time someone walked into that shop and believed it was magic. I closed the album carefully. That was the moment I knew what to do next. We launched a new capsule line that spring. Simple, elegant, purposeful. 6 pieces, all based on our earliest sketches. We called it Origin. Every label carried a stitched message inside the collar. For the ones they told to sit down. For the ones who stood anyway. It sold out in 8 days. But the real joy wasn't the sales. It was the emails. From girls in Ohio, from moms in New Mexico, from a trans teen in Berlin who said wearing the rebel skirt made them feel visible for the first time. That was the real legacy. Not just clothes, but permission. To take up space, to be loud, to lead. And in that, I finally understood what I'd become. Not just a designer, not just a founder, but a breaker of cycles, a storyteller, one who used fabric instead of ink. One night after the launch, Renee and I sat on the rooftop with hot chocolate and blankets. She looked at me and said, "You know, I used to think success meant a corner office and not crying in the bathroom during lunch." I laughed. "What does it mean now?" She shrugged. "This. Being seen, being safe, feeling like I matter." I nodded. "Then we're doing something right." She looked at me seriously. "You ever think about having your own family?" I blinked. That word, family, still felt like a splinter sometimes. "Not in the traditional way," I said. "But this? What we've built here? This feels more like family than anything I grew up with." She smiled. "Yeah, me too." We stayed there until the lights of the city blurred into stars. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking for the next fight. I wasn't trying to prove I belonged. I wasn't bracing for the next insult, the next dismissal, the next time someone would call my dreams cute. I was just here, rooted, whole, home. Some endings don't come with closure. No dramatic music, no neat little bow, no "and then he changed" epilogue, where the villain finds redemption and everyone hugs under a sunset. Sometimes the most radical ending is just walking away and never needing to look back. 1 year later, almost to the day, I was invited to speak at a leadership summit for young women in business. The theme was Inheritance and Rebellion. I laughed when I saw it, because if that wasn't my entire life story stitched into 3 words, I didn't know what was. The event was held in a sleek auditorium downtown. High ceilings, rows of folding chairs filled with women in their 20s and 30s, eager, nervous, brilliant. Some wore thrifted blazers, some wore bright lipstick like war paint. Some held notebooks so tight you could tell this moment mattered. I took the stage in flats, not heels, in a loose black jumpsuit with wide sleeves that flowed when I moved, one of my own designs. I didn't bring slides, didn't prep a polished pitch. I just told them the truth about the little girl who was told she was too soft for business, too weird, too quiet, too much like Jerry. I told them how for years I tried to become smaller, more likable, more palatable, more acceptable, until one day I realized they don't hate your chaos. They hate that they can't control it. So I let go of being understood, and I built a world where I didn't need permission to exist. After the talk, a girl approached me. Couldn't have been older than 19. Big eyes, calloused hands, tiny sketchbook held against her chest like armor. "I'm studying mechanical engineering," she said, voice shaking. "But all I want to do is design prosthetics for dancers." I looked at her, really looked. "Then do it." She blinked. "What if I fail?" I smiled. Then you'll still be ahead of every person who never tried. She nodded, teary-eyed, and whispered, "Thank you for being someone like you." That night, I went home and opened my original sketchbook, the one from the barbecue, the one my dad had crumpled in his fist, the one I thought I'd never be brave enough to open again. The pages were wrinkled. Some still bore faint beer stains, but the lines? Still mine. I scanned one sketch, the one I'd drawn at 15 of a structured long-line jacket with asymmetrical buttons and wing sleeves. Then I made it, cut, sewed, adjusted, and wore it to the next Cole family reunion. Yes, I went back, not for them, but for me. They didn't know I was coming. The venue was smaller this time, more backyard barbecue than lakeside estate. Most of the same faces, older, tired, some embarrassed, some still delusional. My dad didn't look at me when I walked in, but he didn't look away either. He nodded, a slow, worn-down nod, not of apology, not even of understanding, just acknowledgement. And that was enough, because this time I wasn't here to prove anything. I was here to exist on my own terms. After lunch, as everyone gathered for a group photo, I slipped away. Found Jerry sitting alone on the porch steps, sipping lemon tea from a paper cup. "So," he said, not turning around, "you came. Just for the potato salad." "Liar." We laughed. I sat beside him. "It doesn't hurt anymore," I said. He nodded. "That's how you know you're free." 2 weeks later, Cole Studios celebrated its 5-year anniversary. We launched a campaign not for clothes, but for courage. A digital exhibit featuring the stories and sketches of women, girls, and non-binary artists who had once been told their dreams were unrealistic. We called it unapologetic. We didn't censor the rage in their voices, didn't clean up the grammar, didn't filter the photos. We let them roar. And it went viral, because truth always echoes louder when spoken by someone who's done pretending to whisper. I was asked once during an interview, if you could go back and speak to your 16-year-old self, the one at that barbecue, what would you say? I smiled, closed my eyes, and answered, "You were right." Not, "It gets better," not, "Hang in there." Just this: you were right. Right to draw, right to dream, right to be bigger than the small box they built for you. Because that's the thing they never tell you. Being underestimated is painful, but it's also fuel. And when you light it, you don't just rise. You burn down every lie they ever used to hold you back. So if you're reading this, if you're the girl in the back of the classroom scribbling designs no one believes in, if you're the boy who loves color and chaos in a world that tells you to gray yourself down, if you're the dreamer labeled delusional by people too afraid to want more, this is for you. Your story doesn't end with their disapproval. It begins with your decision to build, to break cycles, to become everything they said you could never be, unapologetically, powerfully, and completely you.